I was 7 years old the first time I heard my mother call me a burden. She was on the phone in the kitchen, and she did not know I was standing in the hallway. I remember the way her voice dropped when she said it. Not angry. Not loud. Just tired. Like I was a fact she had learned to live with. Like I was weather. She's just a lot, she said to whoever was listening. She always has been. Some children, you love them and it still feels like too much. I pressed my back against the wall and made myself as small as I could. And something in me quietly decided that small was what I was supposed to be. I spent the next 28 years believing her. I built a life anyway. A careful, deliberate life, a career in family law, a husband who stayed, a daughter named Alia who laughs so freely it still surprises me. I built it all on the ruins of what my mother refused to give me, and I told myself that was enough. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, my doorbell rang. I opened the door and there she was. Margaret. My mother. Smaller than I remembered, and holding a bag in each hand, and wearing an expression I had never seen on her face before. She was asking. For the first time in my entire life, she was standing at my door, in the rain, asking to be let in. Behind me, I could hear Alia singing something in the kitchen. I could smell dinner on the stove. I could feel the warm light of the life I had built pressing gently against my back. And I stood there, hand on the door, and I thought about everything she had ever taken from me. I had no idea, yet, how much that actually was. I work in family court. I have spent 11 years sitting across from parents who do not understand what they have done to their children. I read their case files the way other people read the news, with a kind of practiced, necessary distance. Because if you feel everything in this work, you cannot do it. You have to learn to hold the grief without drowning in it. What I did not expect was that all those years of reading other people's wounds would eventually teach me to read my own. My mother never hit me. I want to be clear about that. There were no dramatic scenes, no locked doors, no visible damage that a photograph could capture. What Margaret gave me instead was something quieter and more patient. She gave me the slow, consistent impression that my existence was an inconvenience she had agreed to manage. She sighed when I entered rooms. She cut conversations short when I needed something. She forgot school events, not always, just enough that I learned not to remind her. And every so often, when she thought I was not listening, she described me to other people in a tone of voice that a woman uses for a problem she cannot solve. The only person who ever looked at me differently was my grandmother Josephine. Josephine smelled of lavender and spoke in the unhurried way of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that the people she loved deserved her full attention. Every time she saw me, every single time, she took my face in both her hands and said the same thing. There you are. The best thing to happen to this family. She died when I was 19. And I was told, gently, that she had not left much behind. I was too broken with grief to ask questions. I was too conditioned to push back. So I didn't. I just got smaller. And kept going. And then, all these years later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door. I told myself it was the rain that decided it. That I could not leave a sick woman standing in the cold. But the truth I have had time to sit with since, is that some part of me had been waiting for this moment my whole life. The moment she would finally come and ask instead of dismiss. The moment that would prove that I mattered enough to need. She looked smaller in person than she had in my memory. Her coat was damp, her hands trembling slightly at the handles of her bags, and her eyes, those cool, assessing eyes I had spent my childhood trying to satisfy, were doing something unfamiliar. They were uncertain. I didn't know who else to call, she said. And I stepped back and let her in. Alia appeared from the kitchen almost immediately, curious and open the way only 8-year-olds can be, completely unaware that the woman standing in our hallway had spent 30 years making her mother feel unwelcome in her own skin. She said hello. Margaret smiled at her, a real smile, I noticed. The kind she rarely aimed at me. Over the next few days, I watched my mother move through my home the way I had learned, professionally, to watch people in intake interviews. Careful. Cataloging. She complimented the kitchen and then let her eyes linger on it a moment too long. She asked about my work with a warmth that felt rehearsed. She held Alia's drawings like she was calculating their value. I told myself I was imagining it. I made her tea. I made up the spare room. I sat across from her at dinner and answered her questions and smiled when she smiled. And every night, when the house went quiet, I lay in the dark and felt the specific unease of a woman who has spent her career recognizing, in other people's stories, the exact shape of her own. Something was wrong. I just did not know what yet. It was a Tuesday morning when I went to clear the spare room closet to make more space for her things. There was a box in the back that had been there since we moved in, a box of Josephine's old correspondence that my mother had asked me to store, years ago, when she was clearing out the family home. I had never opened it. Grief has a way of making certain doors feel like they should stay closed. I opened it that morning without ceremony, just looking for the inventory list I thought I had taped to the inside of the lid. The first thing I found was a letter in Josephine's handwriting. I sat down on the closet floor and read it. Then I read the next one. And the next. Josephine had been meticulous. She had written, in her careful unhurried hand, exactly what she wanted for me. The house. The savings account. A note about a specific piece of jewelry she had wanted me to have when I got married. She had described me, her granddaughter, the best thing to happen to this family, with a love so specific and so detailed that my chest physically ached reading it. And then, at the bottom of the box, I found the legal document. It was a transfer of estate authority. Signed. Notarized. Redirecting Josephine's entire estate from my name, to an account in my mother's. The signature on my behalf was not mine. I knew that with the certainty of someone who has spent 11 years handling legal documents. I knew the shape of my own signature. I knew the date was wrong. I knew the notary seal did not match the county where I had been living at the time. I sat on the floor of that closet for a very long time. I did not cry. I reached for the notepad I keep in my back pocket. I always keep one, old professional habit, and I started writing everything down. I did not confront her that day. Or the next. I have learned, in my work, that the worst thing you can do with evidence is move too fast. Emotion makes you reach before you are ready. And I could not afford to reach before I was ready. Instead, I did what I do. I investigated. I have professional access to public estate records. Over the following days, between client meetings and court filings, I pulled everything: Josephine's original will, the probate records, the account transfer history, the eventual sale listing for her house. I cross-referenced dates. I flagged inconsistencies. I built, page by patient page, the kind of file I would hand to an attorney and say, "This is airtight." And it was. The full picture, laid out in legal documents and bank statements, was this: Josephine had left me her house and her savings, roughly $60,000, with the explicit intention that it reach me directly. My mother had intercepted the estate during probate, forged my authorization, transferred everything into an account I had never seen, and spent it over 7 years. 7 years. I was 26 when the last of it was gone. I remember 26. I was working 2 jobs, eating cheap, and telling myself that struggling was just what building a life felt like. Meanwhile, I was in that closet. The other thing I noticed during those quiet days of investigation, Margaret noticed the change in me. She could not have named what shifted, but she felt it. She became more careful. More watchful. She made small comments that were testing something, probing for the edge of what I knew without asking directly. She had done this my whole life. Read the room before committing to a version of herself. Calculated the risk before speaking. She was not a sick woman asking for comfort. She was someone who had arrived at the edge of accountability, and was very quietly preparing her defense. I chose a Thursday evening. Alia was at a neighbor's house. The kitchen was quiet. I made 2 cups of tea, not because I wanted one, but because my hands needed something to do, and I placed the documents on the table the way I would place evidence in front of a judge. Organized. Time-stamped. Labeled. Then I sat down. And I waited for my mother to come and join me. She saw the papers before she sat. I watched her face pass through something, a flicker of recognition she controlled almost immediately. She pulled out the chair, sat down slowly, and looked at me. "What is all this?" she said. Calm. Almost bored. I told her exactly what it was. I did not raise my voice. I did not use emotional language. I walked her through the documents the way I walk clients through difficult realities, clearly, without cruelty, without unnecessary pause. She tried confusion first. Then she tried reframing. The estate had been complicated, she had been managing things, I had been too young and too grieving to handle it herself. Then victimhood, the exhaustion of being a single mother, the sacrifices I could not understand, the ingratitude. And then, when none of those worked, she went cold. "You want to talk about what people are owed," she said quietly. "I raised you. I kept you clothed and fed and in school for 18 years. I did that alone. And you sit here with your organized little papers like I owe you something?" She leaned forward. "I know people at your firm, Mirabelle. I know how these things work. One phone call and suddenly everyone is asking uncomfortable questions about your home, your parenting, your fitness. You want to go down this road with me?" The kitchen went very still. I looked at her for a long moment. And I said nothing. Because I had expected this. And I was already 3 steps ahead. She made the call on a Friday. I do not know exactly what she said. I imagine it was vague and carefully worded, the kind of concern that cannot be easily disproven because it was never quite specific enough to be called a lie. By Monday morning, my supervisor had received an anonymous inquiry about my home environment. By Tuesday, I had been asked, gently, kindly, by someone who clearly did not want to be asking, whether everything at home was stable. I handled it. I have spent 11 years navigating systems that run on paperwork and procedure, and I know how to respond to a fabricated complaint. I provided documentation. I remained calm. The inquiry closed within a week. But the week itself. That week was the floor. That was the week the old reflex came back with everything it had, the reflex to make myself smaller, to apologize for taking up space, to absorb the damage quietly and tell myself it was fine, it was manageable, it was the price of keeping the peace. And then I remembered something my grandmother, Josephine, told me once. I was 12. I had come to her house crying over something my mother had said, and instead of comforting me immediately, Josephine had sat me down at her kitchen table, the same way she sat down for every serious thing, and looked at me steadily and said, "Baby, the people who tell you that you're too much, are always the people who are not enough. Don't you let them write your story for you." I sat with Alia at bedtime that night and told her a story I made up on the spot, something about a girl who found out she was braver than she knew. Alia fell asleep before the ending. I stayed in the dark for a while after. And I understood, with a clarity that settled into me like something finally clicking into place, that I could not model surrender to this child. Not one more day. The next morning, I did something I had spent 35 years not doing. I treated myself like one of my own clients. I called my attorney, a woman I had worked alongside for years, someone who knew estate law the way I knew family court. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment when I finished, and then she said, "You have more than enough. How do you want to handle it?" I told her. Over the next 3 days, I organized the complete evidentiary file, the original will, Josephine's letters, the forged transfer document, the bank statements, the probate records, with the same methodical precision I bring to every case I touch. I drafted the document myself and had my attorney review and notarize it. It was 2 pages. Clean. Specific. Unemotional. A formal acknowledgement of the estate fraud, with a structured repayment plan attached, modest monthly amounts, legally binding, realistic for her means. And alongside it, a care arrangement I had already researched and partially secured, a reputable professional service that would provide Margaret with appropriate, dignified support for her health needs. Funded, in part, by the repayment agreement. She would be looked after. Properly. At a professional distance. I also prepared the alternative, a fully documented estate fraud referral, ready to be filed with the district attorney's office. Signed by a licensed legal professional who knew precisely how to make it move through the system. I set both documents on the kitchen table that evening. 2 pens, placed neatly to the side. I made no tea this time. I sat down. folded my hands. And I waited for my mother to walk in and see what I had built. Not out of revenge. Out of the simple, overdue understanding that I had always deserved someone who fought for me. And that someone was going to have to be me. She came into the kitchen and stopped when she saw the table. She stood there for a moment, just a moment, and in that moment I saw something move across her face that I did not have a name for. Not fear exactly. Not guilt exactly. Something older and more tired than either of those things. The look of a woman who has been running from a particular room her whole life, and has just realized she has walked into it. She sat down slowly. She picked up the first document and read it. All of it. I watched her eyes move across the page, line by line, unhurried, the way you read something when you already know what it says. The kitchen was completely silent. No television. No sound from the street. Just the faint tick of the clock above the stove and the sound of my mother turning a page. When she finished, she set it down. She did not look up. I said, quietly, you have two options. They are both on the table. She did not argue. She did not perform. She did not reach for confusion or victimhood or contempt. Every version of Margaret I had spent 35 years bracing for was simply absent. What was left was just a woman. Older than I had let myself notice. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with her diagnosis. She picked up the pen. Her hand moved slowly across the signature line. And the sound it made, the soft scratch of a pen on paper in a silent room, was the quietest, heaviest sound I have ever heard in my life. No courtroom. No audience. No gavel. Just my mother's signature on a document that said, in the formal, irrevocable language of the law, I know what I did. And I am acknowledging it. She set the pen down. She did not say she was sorry. And I did not ask her to. I picked up the document. I slid it into the folder. I made the call to the care service while she was still sitting there, and I scheduled the intake appointment in a voice that did not shake. When I hung up, I stayed at the counter for a moment with my back to her. What I felt was not victory. It was not forgiveness. It was not the clean, bright feeling I had imagined accountability might bring. It was something quieter. Something that felt, more than anything else, like the end of a very long wait. Several months have passed since that evening. Margaret is in a care facility now, clean, professional, and staffed by people who are kind in the practiced, boundaried way of people paid to be present. She is looked after. She is safe. I arranged that deliberately, because what I wanted was not her suffering. What I wanted was simply, the truth to be acknowledged. And the wound to stop bleeding forward. The repayment funds go into a dedicated account every month. Josephine's money, rerouted, finally landing where it was always meant to go. Alia's education. Her future. Her grandmother's love skipping a generation and arriving, at last, at the right door. I visit the facility occasionally. The visits are short and careful and mostly quiet. There is not much to build there, this late. You cannot construct in months what was never laid down in decades. But I go. Because she is my mother, and because the woman I am choosing to be is not someone who abandons the sick. She is just someone who finally knows the difference between care and compliance. This morning I was in the backyard while Alia played in the grass. She was doing something elaborate and entirely unexplained involving a stick, 2 acorns, and what she described as a very important mission. She was entirely absorbed. Entirely unself-conscious. Entirely unafraid of taking up space. I thought about Josephine. About lavender and kitchen tables and the specific way she said my name. I thought about what it means to break a cycle, not in one loud, dramatic moment, but in the 1,000 quiet daily choices to love without conditions. Without ledgers. Without the word burden anywhere near your vocabulary. And then Alia looked up from her very important mission, saw me standing at the edge of the yard, and came running across the grass with her arms already open. Mama, she said. Just that. Just my name. And I caught her. And I held her. And I did not let go. The child who was called a burden grew up to know exactly how much she was worth. And she refused, finally, to let anyone else do the math.